Matt Campbell, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thanks, Jerm. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's been a while since we last chatted. I must just tell you, every time I talk to you, I feel like I need to go and listen to some Prodigy.
Yeah, I've done it. God, it's been a very interesting year, but it might make sense if I go back in time with stuff that's gone on. So, yeah, my brother Jeff, with a G, was on the 106th floor of the North Tower on 9/11, and he was killed, and his remains were identified over a period of years: 2002, 2004, 2008, tiny sort of fragments, really. And these remains were repatriated back to the UK. And because obviously he died in, violent, unnatural manner, if it was in the UK, there'd be an automatic inquest. But only because we repatriated the remains was he entitled to an inquest. So after it was adjourned for quite a few years, Jeff, along with 9 other British victims, had an inquest at the West London Coroner's Court in 2013, which, the whole thing was over in about an hour and 40. I've listened to both the audio and obviously I have the transcript as well. Only 2 out of the 10 victims were represented by any family. Such a long time, I guess, after the everyone had died. But during that 1 hour 40, I think 2 or 3 minutes were spent on my brother's life and death. There was no discussion during that 1 hour and 40 about how any of these people came to their death. And anyway, it seemed like a very much a quick, let's go through the motions. Gave a timeline of some of the events, and from hijacking to hitting the towers to the towers collapsing. But there really was no sort of what you'd expect in an inquest, which is to establish how someone died. Anyway, they recorded an unlawful killing overseas in an act of terrorism. But the critical thing that they said was his death was caused by American Airlines 11 hitting the tower and subsequently causing its collapse. So they're solely putting his death down to the impact of the plane bringing down the tower.
Which, of course, is nonsense.
These towers were built to withstand impacts of planes into the towers, but it was more the fact that there really was no investigation done whatsoever. So bear that in mind when we sort of go forwards in time. So sort of around 2020, so I should say almost immediately, I wanted to basically have a new inquest and actually put together a lot of the evidence over the years that essentially proves that the towers did not come down naturally through fire. In 2020, along with architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, we managed to raise enough money to basically do what's called a Section 13 application. That's Section 13 of the Coroners Act, 1988 Coroners Act, where we put forward, first of all, showing that there's an insufficiency of inquiry, which is one of the things that coroners' courts are supposed to do. This is an application to the Attorney General, who have the power to say yes or no to a new inquest. We also detailed new evidence that hadn't been put before the coroner. This was things from eyewitness accounts of first responders to explosives and explosions going off. You've got expert testimony, so this is from physicists, chemists, etc., who have analysed the dust, who basically spell out some of the physical properties that you can see of the two towers. For example, the North Tower collapsing at a constant acceleration for about 4 seconds, which is impossible if it's actually doing work and destroying stuff below. And we also, well, there's a lot of evidence put into this application. It was 2,500 pages, and the Attorney General's supposed to look at that application and make a decision. I wouldn't say it's routinely done, but there's a lot of people in a year, any given year, either want an inquest or want an inquest reopened, and they go down this path. It's a well-trodden path, particularly for victim family members of someone who's died. And we waited a long time. We really thought it would be sort of 4 to 6 months. Before we'd hear a decision, and we kept waiting, and it was 22 months before they actually got back to us, and it was a kind of very terse couple of paragraphs rejection of our application. No real reasons why, apart from basically dismissing our application. We, at that time, and this is probably the first time I met you, the only option we have is within 90 days, if an authority has made a decision and you wish to challenge it, the only real path you've got is to do this thing called judicial review.
That's when you and I chatted.
Yes. To get the judiciary, the courts, to look into a decision that authority has given, in this case the Attorney General, and is it lawful? Was it irrational? These are kind of legal tests that they can do. And we managed to basically put together our case. We fired it off to the Attorney General, effectively warning them of litigation that's going to come. And they obviously, at that point, realised that their decision was so flawed, wouldn't stand up to legal scrutiny. They withdrew that first decision and basically said we'd make a new one. So litigation didn't continue, which was a victory of sorts. That they obviously realised that their arguments were very weak. So 4 months later, so we're now talking January 2024, they came back with a second decision, and again it was a refusal. And to be honest, it wasn't much better than the first. There's a little bit more detail, but it was something that would easily not hold up to scrutiny in the courts.
Does reopening this investigation change anything?
It won't bring my brother back, but do you mean in terms of over in the States or in the UK? I mean, so first of all, it would change the cause of death, yeah, and without getting into that, just to give you an indication, for example, so if you remember Hillsborough disaster, yeah, that the first verdicts there were returned accidental death. When they subsequently, after fighting for 25 plus years, got new inquests, which incidentally were blocked to the families through the same mechanism I'm trying to do, but eventually it did come out through an inquiry. The cause of death was put down as unlawful killing. Now, again, it's not going to bring any of their loved ones back, but it's precisely what the families kept telling us, completely against what the papers were telling us and what the police were telling us and what the government was telling us, that no, they were unlawfully killed, basically by actions and inactions of the police.
So it's about what's true.
It's what's true. That's what it's about. 100%. Like I said, it's not going to bring my brother back. There are some obviously geopolitical implications. Should, for example, the coroner's court, should we ever get there, when we get there, actually say that it was explosives that brought down the towers and not fire, then obviously...
Well, yes, that changes a lot of things.
But yeah, so I guess I hope that answers your question about what it does and doesn't. So we've got this second decision, which I said was very poor. It's clear they hadn't engaged with any of our evidence and the eyewitnesses and the like. And so again, we have this 90 days where if you're going to challenge it, you have to go and do it through the courts, and you have to do you have to apply for permission to have a judicial review. So again, it's all costing money. I mean, God bless, it's all been funded by the very generous public, because we're talking, tens of thousands of pounds to do all this stuff, to engage a barrister. Sorry, excuse me. So, I mean, as has been the way, with minutes to go for the deadline in April 2024, we actually filed a application for judicial review. And I think it was October, the Attorney General, they came back with their arguments, and it was the first time that they used their so-called get out of jail free card, their trump card, which is decisions of the Attorney General are non-justiciable, which basically means they're above the law. The law can't scrutinise any decision, particularly in our case, a Section 13 inquest application, which, yes, that has been the case, that they have relied on an interpretation from a case back in the 70s, but it's certainly not law. So anyway, our application was obviously sitting there with the High Court judges, and they've obviously got the arguments of the Attorney General. And, there was a chance that the High Court could have just said, yep, the Attorney General's right. They are above the law. Their decisions can't be looked at by the judiciary. But instead, a justice called Chamberlain decided, very unusually, to effectively break our application into two hearings. And the first one was going to be what's called a preliminary issue hearing, which is essentially, his argument was, from the court's perspective, is before we go into, I should have said, our judicial review application is 9,500 pages long. So from the judiciary's point of view, they basically said, okay, we need to look at this preliminary issue of, is the Attorney General above the law or not? And which is, frustrating, because it's another thing that it's got nothing to do with what I'm trying to do, which is get my brother's inquest reopened. We've already gone down this path of, sorting out some legal detail that really has no bearing on my case, or shouldn't have any bearing on my case. But it was an important decision to, or make a decision on, is whether the Attorney General is above the law or not. So we had a hearing in June this year. I went there with my 8-year-old mother. It was, I think, a week before her 80th birthday. And, and I should say, we because of what we were trying to do, we had to engage a KC, which is a King's Counsel, which is kind of like a barrister with bells and whistles. They're more expensive than barristers, but we need that kind of level of knowledge and experience, because we were going against Sir Edie, who is he was the legal counsel for the Attorney General, but he is the government's go-to man for everything that's constitutional. Anything that the government needs to hide behind, they seem to use this guy.
Just hang on, Matt. What does your mother think of all of this?
My mum is kind of like me, as in she wants to know the truth, and yet that's not affecting her memory of Jeff. And so she's very pleased with, I guess, what I've been trying to do. Right from the early days, she'd be reading books that I'd recommend I'd read. She'd watch documentaries, etc. My brother and dad brother Rob and dad are slightly different. They're supportive of what I'm doing. I mean, certainly Rob is, but they kind of, just remember Jeff, how he was, and like I acknowledge, none of this is going to bring him back. but I do think that the truth is important to bring out to everyone, not least myself and my mum. So yeah, mum's been very supportive of what I've been doing over the years. So we're in there. It was a 1-day hearing, and my KC, God bless, a nice mix of self-deprecating humour, a bit of sarcasm in the court, taking the mickey out of really some of the arguments that the Attorney General's legal counsel were making. I think at one point, because honestly, the Attorney General, it didn't sound like he was making any arguments. He talked for about an hour, threw a few Latin words in, as the courts love to do, the old legalese. And, basically after the Attorney General finished, he sort of just said, "Oh, thank you very much for that masterclass in, legalese mumbo jumbo kind of thing." Because it was just no real substance behind the arguments. But anyway, there are a few other anecdotes I could tell, but I don't know, probably haven't got enough time to go through them. But essentially, I thought we put a good case forward. We went back and examined law that was, from the 19th century that also affected our case. And, what we established is there is no law that says the Attorney General is above the law. What the courts and what the Attorney General were relying on, like I said, was a judge's interpretation of a case in the 70s to do with the post office against the union. And it has no real bearing on our case, and particularly anything to do with the Section 13 application. But that they relied on that finding, where basically they said that the Attorney General is not amenable to judicial review. So anyway, we hearing ended, and we knew that there'd be at least a couple of weeks before a decision was made. And we got that decision on the 1st of July. And unfortunately, the High Court judges, there were two of them. I should have said, so the guy who actually ordered the preliminary issue was a younger judge, and he seemed very much on side throughout the whole of the proceedings, almost enjoying some of the mickey taking that my KC was doing of the Attorney General's counsel. And there was an older judge who was very much more, I think, stuck in his ways. Traditional conservative sort of judge. And anyway, we lost. They basically agreed that the interpretation of the case in the 70s, Gurrier, still stood, which, we kind of expected might be an outcome. But what we didn't expect was the wording that the judges used throughout the judgment, essentially saying, they actually used the word twice, that this position in law that they're having to kind of stand by because precedent was set in a higher court is anomalous. And that doesn't sound like a big word, but in law that's massive. And certainly if you look back historically, which was part of our argument, the last 20, 30 years, law has become very progressive. I mean, certainly modern judicial review is different to how it used to be, say 50 years, let alone 100 years ago. And basically spelt it out that the only court that can deal with this without having their hands tied from this strange interpretation from this case in the 70s is the Supreme Court. So after discussion with my counsel, we decided that it looked like the High Court judges had left the door not just a little bit open, but wide open for us to apply for what's called a leapfrog certificate, which is you're applying to basically leapfrog the normal path, which would be the Court of Appeal, and go straight up to the Supreme Court, to apply to the Supreme Court, without having to go through the cost, the time, and frankly, it'd have the same outcome at the Court of Appeal because it's not sufficiently high enough. And so the judges basically said the Supreme Court needs to deal with this. So we applied for the leapfrog certificate. It's kind of rare to do that. Only a few are granted or even applied for each year. And it was granted, which basically means and that was against the objections made by the Attorney General. Of course, they objected. So it completely ignored their objections, and they granted without any restrictions the leapfrog certificate, which basically paved the way for us to apply directly to the Supreme Court for an appeal, and that's called a permission to appeal. And so we did that in September. Again, the Attorney General legal team objected, as of course they're going to.
Do you think that they don't want us to go ahead because they're hiding something, or do you think that they just feel it's a waste of time?
No, I mean, so my KC only got involved January this year when we had this preliminary hearing issue, and he wasn't aware of our inquest application and everything that had gone before. And I mean, they're obviously from the same chambers. Nick Bowen is the KC and Nick Stanage is the barrister. I mean, I think the first conversation with Bowen was he couldn't understand why we were being blocked. I mean, clearly we were well above the threshold that normally would allow or trigger a new inquest, i.e. the Attorney General would grant permission. I mean, he was so perplexed by this, actually, one of the anecdotes I wasn't going to tell, but I'll tell it, during the actual hearing we had at the High Court. I mean, he's there and he's just musing out loud going, for reasons unknown, why did it take 22 months for the Attorney General to make that first decision? And then he said, why is the Attorney General so insistent on denying this family's right to an inquest, to a new inquest? Is there some sort of trade deal being promised in the background with Trump if they don't allow a new inquest to go ahead? He's already sitting there just, not coming up with conspiracy theories, but like he can't understand why this hasn't just been stamped and put through, because we're so far above the threshold of what's required. We can absolutely prove insufficiency of inquiry. They did zero investigations into my brother's death. We've got all this new evidence that, from first responders, that's including police officers and medics, etc. That's enough on its own, let alone the evidence we have on the physics side, the chemistry side, etc. So, yeah, I mean, they are definitely blocking us having this new inquest. It's not because they think it's pointless. It's because I think there's obviously, like we talked about earlier, obvious geopolitical ramifications. Should it see the court, let alone change the cause of death for my brother. No, I'm not naive to that. I do appreciate that it's going to rock the boat massively. Yeah. So, yeah, where was I? Yeah, so we were talking about the leapfrog certificate. So we've got granted that. We've applied to the Supreme Court. The Attorney General's made exactly the same arguments they made when trying to oppose the leapfrog certificate, which frankly, they haven't got a leg to stand on. And so, whilst you can never be confident, God, if I ask my barristers, they always go 50-50 just because they know it's constitutional and their experience goes, it's never straightforward. Even on paper, it looks like you're winning. You never really know. But I was confident we were going to get granted the right to appeal this at the Supreme Court and actually have a hearing there. Primarily because, on paper, our arguments are sound, but I think there was a little bit of extra weight given to that leapfrog certificate because the justice that had granted it is the head of the administrative courts of the Royal Courts of Justice. So, he deals with all the he's the top of the judicial review justices, yeah. So, to have that have already gone through a legal lens, the highest in the High Court, for that to be rejected the Supreme Court, I mean, apart from it being a blatant block, I wasn't, unless the hidden hand is doing stuff like that, I wasn't expecting us not to get permission granted. So it was pleasantly surprising a couple of weeks ago to receive notification that we had been granted permission to appeal.
That's great news.
Yeah, I mean, it means our case is still live, and we had to scramble. I mean, to say I'm engaged in lawfare is an understatement. It's so expensive. It's taking time that, lawfare it's a function of trying to kill you time wise, money wise, and also to a certain extent, energy wise, because it's quite draining to be doing this all the time and to keep coming up with things. But, we're making progress. For reasons I can go into, if they wanted to kill this, they could have killed it, and they haven't. So what are we on now? Friday the 5th. On Wednesday the 3rd, after a bit of a frantic crowdfunding exercise, because you only have 2 weeks from when you get the permission to appeal granted to actually file what's called a notice of an intention to proceed. So you have to basically pay the court fees up front and say you want to proceed with a hearing. The cost of access to justice in this country is frightening.
How much, Matt?
It was
how much have you? How much have you spent in total on this?
Myself. Oh, you mean?
Well, you and your team, I guess.
We are already over £300,000.
Oh my goodness!
It's what should have been fairly straightforward, which would have kept our costs, down to that initial, whatever it was, 70,000, should have been sufficient, and we should be in a coroner's court now. But we've had to go down this.
Dude, you are legit. That is a serious amount of money.
It's properly serious amount of money. So just going back to the fees. So the fee alone to be able to have a hearing in the Supreme Court is £7,855. Up until 2024, that was £800. Now that's still a lot of money, but it gives you some idea of we're not. Yeah, you can't get justice at a certain level in this country unless you've got access to money. And I said, thankfully, I've had a lot of support from the public in order to do this. So just to go through some of the mechanisms of what's just happened. So the permission to appeal stage, and bear in mind, this is all to do with the justiciability. It seems so ridiculous this day and age. I know we still have a king, but you're talking almost regal powers that the Attorney General has, that they're still above the law in certain decisions. It seems crazy, but anyway, in our permission to appeal, what went on is your application is looked at by 3 judges from the Supreme Court panel. I think there's 12 of them, I think. So we had 3. For the record, their names were Lord, of course, they're all lords, Lord Lloyd Jones, Lord Burrows, and Lord Stevens. I think one's Irishman, an Englishman, and a Welshman. There's probably a joke there somewhere. But
they walk into a bar.
No pun intended with bar, hey? Yeah, and so I do know that I think it's Lord Lloyd Jones has written a pretty scathing piece attacking effectively government immunity and how the judiciary isn't allowed to scrutinise such things. So anyway, so we had these 3 judges. They've ruled in our favour, as I said, I kind of expected. The next step, first of all, the actual hearing itself, it's a minimum 5 Supreme Court judges. On major important constitutional matters, it's normally a minimum of 7. Always an odd number. So that's some way down the line. So our next step is to file what's called a statement of facts and issues, which it's not actually our case. It's essentially agreeing terms with the Attorney General and the courts on the legal framework, what the issues are, what we're trying to resolve, what we agree on, what we don't agree on. And that needs to be done by the 25th of March. And then I think shortly afterwards we get either the hearing date set, which could be as early as July, probably going to push it out after the summer break. So you're probably looking September timeframe, which would be really odd because that'll be around the 25th anniversary, which seems quite astonishing. And in between that, we have to submit our full argued case, and likewise the Attorney General. It's a lot of work. I mean, both they're both called Nick, but both Barrister and KC have said it's about a month's work. For each of them, which is, if you know the rates, what these guys charge, that's a lot of money. And so, I've got to set about trying to raise that over the next couple of months to ensure that this fight still carries on. I mean, it's one of those things on paper, for all the reasons why the leapfrog certificate was granted, for all the reasons that the High Court, in their judgment from our hearing back in June, basically pointing out this is completely anomalous in modern judicial review. I'm as confident as I can be that the Supreme Court will basically rule that the decision of the Attorney General should be, in matters relating to reopening inquests, should be amenable to judicial review, which would be, that obviously has far-reaching implications, not just for me and my family, but for any family that is trying to get an inquest reopened into a loved one's death. And I've already cited Hillsborough. The families were repeatedly blocked in the early years when the first inquests were returned, saying it was an accidental death. And
I was going to ask you now. Have you been fighting this alone, or have you had other families joining you?
So in my application, going back to the actual inquest application, I've got letters of support from victim family members over in the US. In the UK, so there was 67 British victims. I mean, a large percentage of those people actually lived and worked over in the States. So their remains were never repatriated, and I've not had a chance to meet any of those families. I know about 20 of the victim families in the UK. There used to be a sort of regular annual meetup, not least for the on the anniversary, it's like a family support group in the UK. Out of those 20, so I did try to raise it at one of the AGMs, and without naming names, the people who sort of ran the group at the time weren't very enthusiastic about me, raising my concerns about the events of 9/11, and obviously, ultimately the deaths of their loved ones. But three people, or three representations of three victims, did speak with me. One very supportive of what I'm doing, but their own personal circumstance makes it awkward for them to A, speak out, and B, be involved publicly in what I'm doing. One chap, I thought he was going to give me a letter of support, but at the last minute he bottled out because of peer pressure from one of his brothers of, don't get involved with it, so-called conspiracy theory type stuff. And one other family, they're very old, not in great health. He's very supportive, but doesn't want to go public. But he's actually, when he went over to the States on one of the anniversaries, ended up having a long chat with a firefighter who was part of a kind of 9/11 protest or activism over there, and he's very aware of the impossible elements of what we've been told, particularly from a firefighter's perspective. And so yes, I've got support, but not anything meaningful that can help my application legally.
That's so weird, Matt, that people are too scared to challenge the official narrative.
Yeah, it's a bit of that, which it's frustrating, but I totally get it. 'Cause like I said, even in my own family, if I just take it a cross section, my brother and my dad, whilst they're supportive, Rob has done a few things, but to come out and talk about this is not something they feel comfortable with. Certainly my dad. But you've got to remember, from it just keeps picking and reopening a wound. So I'm basically, although I've done a lot of healing over the years, you know, even just going back and talking about my brother or the events of that day, and to a lesser extent my fight since, is kind of almost keeping that wound fresh. It's not completely healed. I mean, it won't heal for me anyway if I don't find out, you know, as best I can the truth. But I kind of get it that people don't want to go there. It's frustrating if it's just purely, you know, because they're afraid of what people might think because you're challenging the official narrative. You know, but I think some of it is more just it's reopening old wounds, and I tell you, it's not easy. You know, I've lost count of the amount of you know, things I've watched, films, dramas, where, you know, just casually 9/11's dropped in all the time, or it's given for a reason for this to go and, you know, do war, or some intelligence dodgy stuff. You know, these are just dramas. It's referenced all the time. And, you know, it's not as heavy as it used to be, but I mean, the first few years were just ridiculous. You repeatedly see, you know, endless clips of the attacks and stuff. It's not easy for people. So I have respect for those that don't want to engage, but yeah, I mean, it's not just victim family members. It's anyone, isn't it? Like, if you're being told that's a, you know, a brick, it's like, no, it's not. It's a cup. But you're frightened of saying it's a brick. It's ridiculous. Yeah.
So now what do you think is going to happen?
So, like I said, I'm as confident as I can be that should we actually get this into the Supreme Court, and by that I mean raising the funds that are required to do that, because we already have the green light from the Supreme Court to do this. I think we will win, because it is so anomalous, and because it's, I mean, to give you an idea, you know, other countries have been through this process that were perhaps formerly part of the Commonwealth, or have a similar setup with an Attorney General where this has been challenged successfully, and now such decisions for inquests are amenable to judicial review. And this will obviously form, I'm guessing, part of our arguments to the Supreme Court that, you know, precedent's already been set. You know, other countries don't enjoy this, I said, regal privilege. I mean, it's almost unthinkable in this day and age that you've got someone, I mean, they're not even, the government's elected, but we don't choose the Attorney General. And they change every time with every government. And to not be able to scrutinise their decisions, you know, sticks out like a very, very sore thumb. So I'm confident at that level. The steps that would happen, basically, so we win at the Supreme Court, we go back to, it's like a game of snakes and ladders, we go all the way back to the High Court, where we're, strictly speaking, we're still at the permission stage. So even though I've paid the fees for the full hearing, because we had to for the preliminary issue hearing, because it was split into two, it goes back to the High Court. They need to consider permission on the papers. And essentially, permission is granted for judicial review on the simple test, which is your case arguable? Yeah, can you argue that you need the courts to legally scrutinise the decision made by the Attorney General? I mean, all day long. I mean, it's so obvious that they haven't engaged. They have acted unlawfully, irrationally, all the standard measures of how you would get a judicial review granted. And also an important point, because I do get asked this, you know, a fair bit, is when we first applied for the judicial review, the High Court had at its disposal one of the measures, which would have been to dismiss the application totally without merit, which is basically, this is ludicrous, and they could have just thrown it out. They didn't do that. So for me, we've already got merit in our case, and to even think about splitting it into a preliminary issue with this issue of justiciability makes no sense if they really wanted to kick it out at that first hurdle. So we're expecting permission to be straightforward. And remember, this is going back to the same judge that has basically opened the door to the Supreme Court. So I'd be very surprised if we don't get permission granted. Once permission's granted, we then actually have the judicial review. And I'm hoping at this stage we have successfully managed to obtain a proportion of the funds that we spent to get to the Supreme Court, because you can get costs awarded from the other side, which would then fund the judicial review and potentially even some of the inquest itself. But at that judicial review would be the first time. So it was mentioned briefly in that preliminary issue hearing in June, some of the evidence that we have. But obviously that wasn't the issue. It's justiciability. It wasn't anything to do with actually our evidence to do with 9/11. So that judicial review at the High Court would be our first opportunity to go through the huge amount of evidence that we have to basically show that we are way above the threshold that's necessary to get a new inquest reopened. And I said we can prove all day that there was insufficiency of inquiry. I mean, there really was nothing. I don't know if I've mentioned previously, but we managed to get hold of, as part of the process waiting for our application to be approved or not approved. This is way back in 21, 22. We managed to obtain the police report that had been hidden from me. It was classed as exempt from disclosure by the police, and this is counter-terrorism, this is SO15, who had prepared a report for the coroner to look at. And I guess because I had legal representation at this point, we were talking to the courts, we were talking to the Attorney General, this document was released to us. And I was expecting something quite substantial and something hidden in there that they don't want us to know. Some information about the attacks, etc., and how the towers came down. It was the complete opposite. I think they hid it from us because it's embarrassing. It's about 4 pages, an executive summary, which it's so ridiculous. It's like telling a story. You had a timeline of events for AA11 and UA175, and a 1-page summary of Zachariah Masui, who was one of the people who was arrested prior to the attacks. And that was just a 1-page report from the FBI, which has nothing to do or any bearing on my brother's death or how he died. That was it. I mean, that was the extent of what was put in front of the coroner for her to make her decision on how he died. That's embarrassing for them, for that to be exposed. And so, for me, again, I've got ridiculous optimism. I can't see how we can lose the judicial review, because it's clear that there was no investigation. They haven't engaged whatsoever with our evidence, new evidence that is so above the threshold that would normally be required. I mean, to give you an idea, Jerm, how easy it is to get an inquest reopened, whilst we were waiting for the application to be decision to be made, we submitted any new cases that came up that could be supportive of our application. So some of those were rulings that judges have made on inquests being reopened. And judges are saying things like, it should almost be sufficient that if a family demands a new inquest be reopened, that's sufficient to open a new inquest. Now, I mean, obviously, that's a little bit of a low threshold, but you get the point. That's a judge basically saying, of course, a new inquest is going to be opened because the family wanted it. So for us to have all this new evidence and eyewitness testimony and the like, and for it to not be sufficiently strong enough to show that the Attorney General has acted unlawfully, irrationally in dismissing our application is going to be.
What do you think actually happened on the day?
That's a kind of a big, complicated question. I mean, the answer to that is what we know right now. So people ask me what. Like
well, that's the official story. Yes, I know.
Yeah. So what I think was involved, and you can kind of prove this in a court of law, is the CIA were actively protecting 2 of the hijackers. They knew they were so-called Al-Qaeda. From the Malaysian summit in January 2000, to entering the US, and withholding that from the FBI. Those same two hijackers, alleged hijackers, were again protected, given material support by Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabian intelligence and Saudi Arabian government officials, who I believe were part of an operation that the CIA were involved in. And this is all documents that have gone through either Guantanamo courts or have been part of the Saudi lawsuits. And then you've also got Israeli foreknowledge, and there's the Shia memorandum. There's the amount of Mossad agents that were living amongst the terrorists is almost mind-boggling. We're talking like 200 meters away in amongst all the and they were watching the American DEA agents. For me, a lot of people knew what was happening, what was going to happen. That I have no doubt. And so, at an absolute minimum, it was a let it happen on purpose, event, kind of like Pearl Harbor, however you want to historically frame that. And again, you can prove what's continued to go on over the last 24 years is a cover-up. So you've got a cover-up from the government, successive governments in the US. You've had the blocking of the Saudi trial that my father became a plaintiff of in, I think, 2002. He's with Motley Rice. You've got, Obama, I think he tried to veto the passing of the JASTA Act, which allows you to sue a foreign state, because up until that point, nations were immune. You either went to war with them or you didn't fight against them. I don't know what the situation was then. So for me, the most frustrating thing now, again, is to try and get access to the truth. Is it still actively being covered up? You've still got so many files redacted. That's frustrating to me. You've got the trial, the never-ending trial that will never get to trial down at Guantanamo Bay, which, for all its faults, at the moment is the only live case to do with the attacks. It is absolutely unfathomable that 24, 25 years on, there's not been any legal case, no accountability for what went on that day. And that goes down to those that did fail, on paper. All of them got bloody promotions. That's just astonishing to me from, the intelligence side and defence side. They all went on to do better things after, failing so badly, whether by design or accidentally because they're incompetent, who knows? So it's what exactly happened is hard to know. I said, what I'm trying to shine a light on is the fact that those towers did not come down naturally through fires. And I think the most
controlled.
It was controlled, and it was brought down. They were brought down deliberately, and the easiest way into that, if you have a block on that, is to look at Building 7. If we're to believe the official narrative, and what NIST came up with, the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, the people who were tasked by the American authorities to look into the collapse of the towers, but in particular Building 7, 47 stories. If you believe what they said, which it was a natural progressive collapse, they've reinterpreted Newton's laws of mechanics. You just can't have something falling at free fall acceleration and still think there's something underneath supporting it. And the only way that happens is when you deliberately take down a building. That's my area. The scope of an inquest is about how my brother died. It's not, how the attacks were orchestrated, how they were planned, how they were carried out. It's all about how he was killed. And so, that's, I guess, what I'm trying to establish and get to the truth of that through the mechanism of an inquest. I think what's interesting for me is when, not if, we get to an actual new inquest. It's not supposed to be adversarial. So it's not me against the authorities. It's supposed to be a coroner in a court of law looking at all evidence. that's put before them. So to have legal representation there is going to be critical, because they can't, dismiss someone trying to post a DVD to the judge or sending a pile of papers. It's like, no, we're going through legal representation. The coroner has to deal with it. The authorities have to deal with freefall. And good luck to any physicist who wants to prostitute himself and basically come up with a new, Newton's laws of mechanics version 2. Good luck with that.
This is not something that's going to be overnight, but you have spent so much money on this that there has to be an outcome at some point.
Yeah, one outcome would be is how corrupt the judiciary is if they don't basically side with us and saying that the Attorney General is above the law. It'll be a very strange message to send out to the rest of the world when, like I've said, there's already countries that have removed this regal power that the Attorney General has. Just to give you a flavour of some of the cases that have been blocked. Remember David Kelly, the weapons inspector, Iraq War. They used the mechanism to block an inquest being reopened. So a group of doctors, pathologists who could see that something's absolutely not right with David Kelly's death, tried to get his inquest reopened. That was blocked using the mechanism that was still in place. Now, they didn't go down the path I've gone because they didn't have a judge that was willing to break this into a preliminary issue and have this thing scrutinised once and for all. It's for me, it will show whether that we've got an open, fair judicial system or not, depending on where this goes. Because I said on paper we win all the way. The inquest and trying to get to the truth of exactly what happened, like you say, that's going to take time, and we may not establish that even during my inquest. There's going to be elements that we won't be able to prove or disprove. But yeah, it is like JFK. This is going to be going on for decades.
You said earlier that you had an association with the engineers, architects for 9/11 Truth. Have any of those individuals sided with you?
As an organisation, they obviously were helping me out initially. A lot of the people who have been involved in helping me, without naming names, the experts, etc., have either been associated or at one part were maybe part of A&E 9/11 Truth, but not all. It's the evidence stands on its own. I'm not linked with A&E at all, if that's what you're asking. The people who have come forward are going to be under oath, will be cross-examined, etc. So it won't the inquest itself. That's, I guess, true of almost anything where you're challenging the official narrative. What I would say, for example, it's a lot easier to do it if you're no longer working, you no longer have responsibilities to look after kids, etc. And I can cite a very brave firefighter who tried to do what he could whilst he was still working, and that's Paul Cayley. Are you familiar with Paul Cayley? He made the documentary Calling Out Bravo 7, and if people haven't seen that, go and check it out. You can get it on YouTube. He's a firefighter who basically put together a documentary on just the impossibilities of Building 7, but from the lens of a firefighter. And he whilst he was still a firefighter, he actually gave a presentation at the annual sort of health and safety conference that they have, and he did a presentation on Building 7. And he kind of cleverly did it from a point of view of a normie. And it was essentially, if a steel frame building can collapse at sudden notice without any real warnings, we should be, say there was a fire in the Shard in London. He was saying that we should be evacuating an area at least twice the radius of the height of the Shard, because we may not be so lucky that it falls down to its own footprint. It could go, any direction. For the point he made was, none of the firefighting codes changed. They still believe that a steel frame building is safe. They will get a bridgehead or whatever it's called, a couple of floors underneath the fire, set up base there, and then attack the fire. So he was doing as much as he could whilst he was working. It's easier now, obviously because he's retired, but he's still continuing to do stuff. So I mean, I get it. It's not easy. We all have responsibilities in our lives, and I guess it depends how close you are involved. It's yeah. It's people are people. I get it. I'm not forcing anyone to do anything. I'm just really pleased that there are people that are willing to come out and to potentially risk their livelihoods, I guess, let alone their lives, in coming out and saying stuff.
Okay, Matt, how can my audience keep up with all of this?
The best way to follow what I'm doing is probably on X. It's Matt Campbell 911. The alternative to get more of a background on stuff, just because I don't have a authorized account on X and I'm limited to the amount of characters I can write, is if you go to the International Centre of 9/11 Justice. That's ic911.org. There's a lot of detail, all the communications backwards and forwards with the Attorney General and the courts, etc., is up there.
And if anybody wants to contribute?
I don't have a crowdfunder set up right now. That finished for the filing 2 days ago. I'd probably say get in contact with either myself or with IC911. Something will be set up in the coming weeks. Just haven't really figured out best way in which to do it. We're talking large sums of money. Obviously, these platforms take a percentage of that, and so it's not really the optimal way of raising the funds. But you're the first one I've spoken to since we got the news. Since the filing on Wednesday. So it's all pretty fresh at the moment.
Matt Campbell, thank you for joining me in the trenches.